You've probably been hearing your entire life that you're supposed to defend liberty. You probably heard it from your mom. You probably heard it from your dad, your grandparents, the TV, the radio. This is something you've been hearing, especially as a Westerner or an American, your entire life. That liberty is to be defended at all costs. And this couldn't be more wrong. And if you don't understand what I'm talking about, don't worry, I'm going to explain it to you. And this is the most important episode I'll ever do on this show. It's going to lay the groundwork and the foundation for everything we do from this point forward. And this philosophy that I'm about to break down to you, I discovered this about 10 years ago, and as time goes on, I realize more and more that it's rooted in truth. That's why I decided to start sharing it with you. Because great deceptions are so great because they make you feel like you're doing the right thing. The best ones make you believe that you're right in your convictions, even though you've been intentionally misled. And that's what's happened with the notion of defending liberty. We have been misled, and I'm going to break it down to you right now. Welcome to the first episode of the Liberty Offensive. So what is the Liberty Offensive? The Liberty Offensive is the philosophy that liberty itself is best protected through proactive persuasion rather than a reactive response. So in other words, the best way to defend liberty is not to defend it at all. It's to be offensive with your liberty and then to spread it around. If you don't understand what that means, I have an analogy for you. But first, just consider what it infers, what it implies if you're defending liberty. If you're defending liberty, that means someone else is already attacking your liberty. Okay, this means you are on the defense. Someone else is already coming after your freedoms and your liberties, so you're defending them. Sometimes this is inescapable. I mean, just basic day-to-day life. I mean, people will disagree. Maybe it could be as simple as mowing your yard with your shirt off or something. And maybe your neighbor doesn't like that. You know, you could use your imagination to come up with a million examples of these minor offenses like this where you have to defend your right to do what you want. And so by default, there will be times when you will simply have to defend liberty on a case-by-case basis. This is unavoidable. So I'm not trying to say that defending liberty is entirely avoidable or should be avoided. That's not the point we're going for here. We're simply making a clear distinction in the effectiveness of being offensive with liberty versus being defensive. And since we've already kind of broken down an example of what defense of liberty kind of looks like on a small scale, we can take that and extrapolate further of what it means to be offensive with your liberty. Now, the greatest analogy by a mile to illustrate what the liberty offensive is in a real-world example is actually Christianity. And it doesn't matter whether you believe in God or not. That's irrelevant. Or if you're a Christian or not. That's also irrelevant because you're going to understand the analogy itself and the illustration that I'm making. So how does it work? Well, a Christian starts as an unbeliever, a non-believer. And through this transformative process of first hearing the news, which is the gospel, right? It's the story of Jesus Christ and his life and what he lived and preached and told and how he died, consequently being born again, the whole story, right? This is not just the good news, it's the greatest story ever told, right? This is how it's known. And so you accept this story, this new information into your heart as a fact. And you don't just accept it as a fact, like some, little factoid out of the National Geographic or something. I mean, this is the greatest truth in the entire universe. I mean, after all, this has to do with the salvation of your very soul, right? So you, knowing that you're incomplete and imperfect, have heard a way out from your imperfections, leading to eternal life and salvation, right? So obviously, this is great news. In fact, it's supposed to be such good news that you feel compelled and convicted to go tell it on a mountain, right? That's what you're supposed to do. At no point is this new Christian ever called to defend what they just learned. They're called to go out and share it the same way that it was just shared to them, right? They're supposed to be the lamp on the lampstand, shining light out on the world. And what is light? Light is offensive. It gets in the dark corners. Light exposes things, right? That's what the Christian is consistently called to do, is to be a light, to expose what's hiding in the darkness, to call it out for being evil, right? And to kind of be these deacons, these beacons of light out in the world, shining the truth. And the truth, of course, is going to be offensive to most people. Most people are not going to want to hear this. And after all, if you don't go out and offend people with this new nugget of truth, then how special, how important to you can it really be, right? Because if you're not sharing it with other people, then certainly it's not that special to you. And how different is that from liberty itself? If you're not expressing your liberty in the most flamboyant way possible, then how precious is this liberty to you? And of course, when a Christian is offended and they're forced to defend their faith, they don't actually defend Christianity. That's used as an opportunity to offend the offender, right? To share the good news of why they believe what they believe, because they're not defending themselves. This is an opportunity to preach, okay? Because that's how the faith is spread. It's spread by preaching, right? You have to get out of the church and you got to go outside in the public and you got to preach the message so you can get new sheep to the flock, because that's how the flock grows, right? But liberty is no different. If you want to bring new sheep to the flock, then you got to go out and you got to preach, okay? Because this is what groups like the ideological left do. They go out and they just don't shut up. They just preach nonstop their ideology. And so they're constantly winning new sheep to the flock, even if their ideology is inherently destructive to them, themselves, and everyone else around them. Certainly, they are constantly preaching and winning in these new sheep. And the lack of believers, per se, those who believe in liberty as an inherently good thing, who believe that their personal rights and freedoms are a good thing, fail to go out and preach and win new people to the flock. Let me put it to you like this, okay? If you wait for someone to attack your freedoms before you respond, then now you are defending liberty, okay? And let me show you what that looks like. You're going about your day, and all of a sudden, plow, you just get smacked in the side of the mouth, okay? Because somebody else wants your freedoms, and they're coming for your freedoms. Just think about the last few years, okay? Here you are minding my own business like a good person, not getting into other people's business because I defend liberty, and suddenly, pow, you just get clocked in the side of the chin. So now you're distorted, you're disoriented, you're in pain, and you're possibly on the floor before you even realize what's going on, right? And why are you in that position? Because you let your guard down, because you think it's some noble, heroic act to just stand by and let the world keep on spinning until somebody offends you, and then you come in like the hero you are to defend liberty. It doesn't even make sense. You know how stupid that sounds? You know how stupid you look when you say that? It doesn't even make sense, right? Nobody is looking at you laying on the ground, getting kicked, getting punched, right, as the guy to be admired. Nobody is saying, wow, look at that guy. He's taking like 10 shots to the face defending liberty. I wish I was him. No. All right? The sheep who have yet to be won to a cause, they're looking at the guy landing all the blows as the guy they want to be, right? The guy's winning the fight. Nobody wants to be on the ground getting beat up, right? Alternatively, if you're the one constantly swinging, right, just landing basic freedom, one after another, then the situation is reversed, okay? Now people want to be you instead, right? Because you're the one standing on your feet, landing blows for your claims, and now you're the one weaning sheep to your cause. Because don't misunderstand what this is for even a second. It's a culture war. There are some people who want to take your freedoms, okay? There are some people who will stop at nothing, who will swing to take as many cheap shots as they possibly can to take your freedoms from you. And the only way to keep them is not to be defensive, it's to be offensive, okay? It's to strike first. It's to be the one standing on his feet when it's all over. Now, we're going to try to help tie this in with a couple of really good examples. We're going to start right here with the Asch conformity experiment, okay? Because I love studies like this, especially studies like this one, which is easily repeatable. I mean, this study has been repeated many times. It's a valid study. And because of that, it's worth understanding what the results were. What does it mean? Well, the Asch experiment, well, I'll tell you what we'll do is we'll watch a quick video here.
The Asch Experiment is one of psychology's oldest and most popular pieces of research. A volunteer is told that he's taking part in a visual perception test. What he doesn't know is that the other participants are actors, and he's the only person taking part in the real test, which is actually about group conformity.
Please begin. The experiment you will be taking part in today involves the perception of line length. Your task will be simply to look at the line here on the left and indicate which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. So, for example...
Okay, so everybody's in on this thing except this one guy, right? And just to make sure you understand, they're all going to look at these lines and determine which line over here matches this one over here, okay?
The actors have been told to match the wrong lines. The volunteer will be monitored to see if he gives the correct answer or if he goes along with the opinion of the group and gives the wrong answer. In the first test, the correct answer is 2.
1. 1.
1. Two.
1. Once again, the correct answer is 2.
3.
3.
3. 3.
3.
The Asch experiment has been repeated many times.
So look, the study is so great. I mean, this guy knew that he was right, okay? He could see clearly what the answer was. But everyone else said something different. And instead of sticking to his guns, he conformed. He went with the crowd. He didn't stick up for the right answer. He did it first, but then what happened? He was overwhelmed with continuity, right? Just the masses over time got to him. And so this is important to understand, because you don't think that other people understand this psychology. You don't think the government doesn't understand this psychology. You don't think the media doesn't understand this. Of course they do. This is happening to you constantly, every day. That's why you need to understand it, right? You might not have even needed to see this. This might be new to you. This might be the first time you've seen a study like this, okay? But it's also possible that you've seen this happen just in your own personal experiences already. I know I have, right? I have seen this happen even before I knew the study existed, and I found this over a decade ago, okay? It's one of my favorite studies. But it's important to understand these kind of psychological fundamentals because everybody else does, right? And if you don't, then you're the sucker because you're the one getting played, because these things are at work all the time. But it works the other way too, okay? Because you can inspire resiliency. And I'm going to give you an example. This is anecdotal, just the best example I can give you that comes from my personal life. So one year in college, the dean, who was also the professor in the capstone courses in my particular area, came into one of the classes. This was like the second, third day of the semester. Okay, we had already had our syllabus. Obviously, we're in the second, third day of class, so we've already gotten started. This guy comes in the room, and he starts telling everyone, look, we kind of looked over some of y'all's grades and some of your benchmark scores in the past, and we've come to the conclusion that a lot of you need a lot of supplemental work, okay, especially in reading and writing. So instead of just picking people out, we're just going to make you all do it. And it's going to cost you, an extra $80 or whatever the price was for the semester. And it's in person, so you'll have to come to class 2 more times a week, every week for the rest of the semester. So at first, I'm just listening to this guy talk and explain himself. Okay, and I always sat up in the front of the class, always, pretty much any class I was ever in, as long as the seat was available, that's where I sat. So I'm kind of turning around looking at people, right, just gauging what other people's responses are going to be. And you're hearing a lot of moans and groans, and this guy gets through his whole spiel, and nobody says a word. And I wait for it, okay? I give other people an opportunity to talk, and nobody says anything, okay? Everybody's ready to capitulate on this thing. And then I said, so he calls on me, and I tell him, look, man, I've already set my schedule for the semester. We've already gotten our syllabi for all of our courses. I've already paid what I expected to pay, and this just isn't floating with me. And I said, I understand there may be some people who need supplemental work and who are at risk of falling either further behind if they don't get this supplemental study, right? I totally get it. But I guarantee you, I'm not one of these guys, right? And so unless you can come out with my test scores and set them down in front of my face and show me that I need this work, I'm not doing it, right? This guy loses it, okay? He says, well, everybody has to do it. It doesn't matter what you are. You're not special. And I said, look, I may not be special, but that's not my point. I'm not sitting here trying to tell you I'm special. I'm trying to tell you that I've already signed up with expectations that you are no longer holding, right? It's like, I live 60 miles from campus, and now you want me to come another 2 days a week, okay? Like, I commute to school every day in a gas-guzzling truck. It's like, who's going to pay for these extra gas expenses? It's like, I'm not doing it. I'm simply not doing it. And the short and sweet of the story is that I eventually won over the class, because as I went on making more and more really good points, other people felt encouraged to start doing the same thing. So by the end of it, he capitulated. Nobody had to take the course. Nobody had to do the extra work. And it's all because I stood up, right? And I voiced my opinion and I fought back. And that emboldened everyone else to get up and start fighting back too. And not only that, but for the rest of the semester, I was a hero. I couldn't do no wrong, right? I would make a joke that was kind of funny and everyone would just burst into tears laughing, right? Because I was the hero, okay? And you can create circumstances like that. And I only say it as an illustration to show you that you should take opportunity to offend with your voice, because your voice is your greatest weapon. And if you don't use it, then the people who do use theirs are going to win. Now, this study is called the Hope Experiment, and this was equally important, and it's also repeatable. Now, even though it was done with rats, it's still significant, and it does have a lot of carryover. This is a good study. We're going to talk about it. The basis of this study is that they would take these rats and they would put them in these beakers full of water, okay? And they would time them. They would see how long it took before these rats would give up and drown. And the base benchmark was about 2 minutes or something, okay? I encourage you to go look this up for yourself and read into it. But these rats, they would give up and drown after about 2 minutes of fighting. So what they did was they would say, okay, let's start with some new rats. And let's pluck them out at 1 minute 58 seconds, okay? Right before they're about to give up and die, and we know it, let's pluck them out and put them back on dry land. And they would give the rats time to reestablish themselves and say, oh my God, I made it, I didn't die, I didn't drown. And they'd pick them up and put them right back in, okay? And you know what happened? After being saved, the rats, instead of giving up in 2 minutes, made it all the way to about 30 minutes. Okay, so what this is doing, what this is trying to tell you is the power of hope, all right? Because if it is your first time through, per se, and you're going to get tired and you're going to give up. But if you've been saved before, then you believe that it's possible to be saved again. And this hope of being saved, this hope of being rescued, gives you strength you didn't have before. It gives you meaning and purpose to fight substantially longer than you ever fought before. You may be asking, okay, so what's the point? Well, just like the Asch Experiment, everybody knows this experiment too. Okay? The governments understand this experiment. The media understands this experiment. And it is used and exploited constantly. The QAnon movement might be a good example of this, okay? Because when Trump came into power, he did so through a lot of frustration. I mean, people were kind of getting up to here with the government. And then you had Trump kind of at the right place at the right time. He was the outsider coming in to defeat the system. And the system showed how much it hated him from the very beginning, right? I mean, the left hated him, the right hated him, the media hated him. I mean, the more deeply entrenched you were in the government, regardless of which party you belonged to, the more you hated Trump. And so Trump comes in with these promises to do all these things. And as time goes on, he hits a lot of roadblocks and some things he doesn't get done, right? And some of it was kind of messed up. I mean, he went through coups, multiple attempted coups against him. But if you were reading QAnon, then it was all good. You didn't have to worry about anything. Don't hit the streets. Don't protest. Don't show anybody that you're upset. Certainly don't talk about it because, hey, behind the scenes, secretly, we're winning the fight, right? There's this secret organization of white hats that are taking down the deep state just one day at a time and hang tight because we're going to post another message to show you how much progress we've made. And it's all cryptic and it was nonsense. Okay, and this strung a lot of people along. And it can be easily argued that where a lot of people might have just kind of hit fever pitch, sick of it, dealing with all these coups against obviously a duly elected president, a lot of them decided not to do anything because it was actually secretly being handled behind the scenes by a QAnon. So in case you haven't figured it out yet, these psychological principles are taking place every single day in your day-to-day life, whether you realize it or not. And some people certainly realize it. In fact, some people weaponize these concepts because they know they work and they know how to string you along. So when you go from one crisis and it was so bad and you never should have put up with it in the first place, but you did, and you got plucked out of the water just when it was all about to keel over, just when it got the worst, the government or some figure came out and they ended it and they saved the day and they gave you this precedent that, you know what, it was really, really hard to go through that, but in the end it was all okay. It all worked out until you go right into the very next crisis, right? The very next crisis all over again, now with the precedent that have hope because it's all going to be okay. I can assure you, these people are one day they're going to let you drown. That's why you got to wake up and you got to realize that, you know, every time you go through one of these crises, you're losing more and more and more freedoms, okay? And you're losing these freedoms because you're not fighting. You're just reacting, okay? And by the time you react, well, it's already been done, right? The freedom has already been taken. That's why you're reacting in the first place. You can't do that. When you defend liberty, you lose it. The only way to keep liberty, the only way to maintain liberty is to be offensive with it and to go out and exercise it, prejudice, and win new sheep to the flock, okay? To be the one standing on their own 2 feet at all times. One of the best ways to respond, by the way, to this as an example is when tyranny is trying to take your liberties from you, one of the best ways to respond is simply not to comply for any reason. Because how they leverage their power is to threaten you with consequences. But they can only threaten you with consequences if you are in a minority. That's part of the reason you need to use your voice and inspire others to be just like you and to go along with you, to win in numbers. This is how you win. You have to go preach and evangelize all the sheep to win the masses, right? To think the same way you do so that we can all in unison say, no, I'm not going to do it, right? You think about in the old days, like some kings in a castle. Okay, there might be 10,000 people inside the castle walls, and yeah, maybe they have armor and swords, but there's 100,000 people outside. You know, okay, so even though everybody inside's well fed, right, and with shelter, and the people outside are starving, there's 100,000 of them. All they had to do was act in unison, and they could have won, right? They could have changed everything. And that's why they keep you divided constantly. It's left versus right, rich versus poor, man versus woman. They're giving you infinite ways constantly, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to find a reason to be divided with your friend or your coworker, or your neighbor, family member, right? They're always giving you some way, some excuse to be divided, okay? Because as long as we are divided amongst each other, we will never be united against them, okay? And who are they? Well, it's tyrants. That's who I'm talking about, tyrants. We understand. All right, so you have to break through the illusions. And part of the show, part of my intentions of the show is to help you understand when you're being fooled. And it's not to tell you when you're being fooled. It's to help you see it for yourself. Because the world doesn't need me to tell everybody when they're being fooled. The world needs you to know it for yourself. And we're all going to be on this journey together to help unlock ourselves and our minds to learn how to see the narrative and to understand when we're being manipulated. Okay, because that gives us the edge. Because they say knowledge is power, but that's only partially true. If knowledge is power, then you have to infer that the control of knowledge is absolute power, right? Because after all, what is true? Well, winners decide the truth, don't they? I mean, think about what George Orwell said in 1984. When you pervade the lie, you tell the lie, and you tell it so long over time that it slips into history as the truth. Okay, when it becomes the only message and no other message exists, then by default the lie becomes the truth, and nobody is left to say otherwise, right? Understand concepts like this, because history is being forged, and there's a information war for your mind, okay? All this stuff going on in Europe and Russia and Ukraine, these are military conflicts, but the greatest war, the greatest battlefield is the one for your mind, with the information that is spread out there. And it all depends, it all relies on you accepting it, right? You believing the narrative and not contradicting it, not acting against it. Because when you start doing that, they lose control and you regain all the power. Part of why I lay out these psychological principles for you, and by the way, I only talked about two of them, just two. Do you understand how many of those there are and how repeatable they are, how many good studies there are? We talked about two of them, okay? And these things are constantly at play. We're just taking a slow, methodical process here to help enlighten you and to help wake you up to the system at work. Because the world doesn't revolve on facts. It doesn't. And a lot of people, that's why they get duped so easily. They think they're being told the truth and we do things because of what we're being told. No. The world works on narrative, okay? Narrative. That's the word. The world runs on narrative. And when you understand that, it becomes easy to see the plot. And when you know the plot, you can predict what happens next. It's part of why I made this channel, because everything we've lived through in the last few years was predictable. In fact, I told a lot of people that it was coming. A lot of people laughed at me, okay? And the reason why I regret not doing this channel sooner is because I don't have the precedent for you guys watching this for the first time of credibility, right? I'm just a guy with a microphone. You've never heard me talk before. There's no credibility, so I regret not having done this sooner. But I can assure you that all of this stuff has been predictable, and what's coming next is also equally predictable, in my opinion. That's why I'm encouraged to start the show right now, to just get started, because what's coming next is going to be substantially worse than what we just went through. Okay? Crisis is coming, and this is not about doom porn and being scared. All right? I'm probably one of the most optimistic people in any of my groups, despite being the one who knows better of how bad it's about to get. And part of that's because I'm prepared for it. I'm not just prepared with tangible goods, I'm prepared here and here. And that's where you need to be, because the world doesn't need me. The world doesn't need me telling you all this stuff. The world needs you. The world needs more of you. And that's the point, right? Because we got to get out there and start preaching. Because if you believe, like I do, that your personal freedoms and liberties are worth keeping and saving, well, then we have to start preaching. We got to start winning new sheep to the flock. Otherwise, we're going to lose all of them. And so it's time to get outside of the church. It's time to get outside of our little social circles and start evangelizing people as much as possible. And we have to counteract with equal to or greater measure than the current narrative that's prevailing right now, okay? And the only way we can win this is to be vocal. And the worst thing you can do, it's always been kind of a meme of the left that they'll get into these safe spaces. They'll isolate themselves in their own little bubbles so they don't have to hear things that they don't want to hear. It's always been kind of a running joke of the left, right? They're very insensitive, insecure people like that. Now, they'll go out and scream at the top of their lungs out in public what they believe, but they shelter themselves from anything else, right? What an irony that is. Well, now you're starting to see more people, I'll say on the right, who are somewhat doing the same thing, right? They'll say, well, if this guy is going to be the way he is, then I don't want to talk to him anyway. But this couldn't be more wrong either, okay? Because nobody needs to hear this stuff more than the people who disagree with us, right? You don't win new sheep to the flock by staying in the church. You got to go out and preach. And so that's what this call is, to take liberty on the offense, to take advantage of the liberty offensive, a clarion call to action, to be offensive with liberty, and to do our part, the part that we have not been doing, to help steer where we go from here. Because though crisis is inevitable now because of our inaction, certainly we can dictate where we end up if we start taking action now. And that's what this is. It's a clarion call to action. Use your voice. Okay, don't be afraid or ashamed to offend someone with your opinion. That's what liberty sounds like. It's offensive. No one wants to be told they're wrong. No one wants to hear that they've been misguided. No one wants to hear what you have to say, probably most of the time. But if you want to protect liberty, then you have to exercise it. Okay, and you have to spread it and you have to share it. And it all starts here. The first episode of this show, like I said, is laying the groundwork for everything that is to come. Because I meant it when I said that everything that's happened to this point, especially over the last few years, was predictable. And what's coming next is also predictable. When I lay the groundwork the way I have, you can get ready and prepared for what's coming next. I'm just going to leave you with this. Make sure you pick number 2. Okay? Don't conform. Never conform. When you know you're right, you just listen to your heart, listen to your brain, and pick the right answer. Okay? Don't let other people pick for you.